Hello, today's Rambam for Wednesday, the 14th of Shvat, Sefer Torah, is the last Perek of the Shir, is beginning of Parah Adumah. Hilchos Parah Adumah, Perek Aleph. So I'm going to discuss two aspects or three aspects of Parah Adumah, which are very interesting. In general, we have to understand that Parah Adumah is a very unique situation. We're all familiar, even those of us that don't remember the Rambam from year to year, but we certainly remember the Perek in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe writes in Igeres HaKodesh to his Mechutin Rav HaKodesh, Reb Levi Yitzchak, on the passing of his son, Reb Meir, which is Igeres HaKodesh Siman Chav Ches. And he begins Lama Nismacha Parshas Miriam, the Parshas Parah, Leimelach Ma Parah, Mechaperes Chulu, just like Parah Mechaperes Af Misas Sadikim. So the Alter Rebbe asks the famous question, V'tzarech Lahavin. We have to understand Lama Nismacha Davka LeParah Adumah Hanas Chutz LeShalish Machnes Ela Dechatas Kari Achmana. How come Misas Sadikim is compared to a very obscure carbon that was not even done within the Beis Hamikdash or within the Machne Shechina? It was done outside all of the Machnes, but we have to have a special limud that is called the carbon chatos. So right away we know, when we learn Tanya every year, right away we know that Parah Adumah is a very unique carbon, so to speak. That even that it's a kapara, but it's not it's chatas kairach mana. We have to come to the fact that the Torah refers to it as a chatas, and therefore the Alter Rebbe asks the question: why don't we compare Misa Sadikim to a real carbon chatas? So we have to understand before we begin the fascinating study of the laws of Parah Adumah. It's very interesting and very worthwhile to go through exactly what is the geder of a Parah Adumah. What is the geder? The truth is, it's a very beautiful subject, and the Parah Adumah, truthfully, is like on the gvul, on the boundary between what we call what we're referring to in learning of Rambam and learning of Mishnayos, the laws of Taharis, or the laws of laws of Kachim. It's a confusion. What is it? Does Parah Adumah belong in the laws of Kachim? We'll see it, of course, in a minute. Why? Or does it belong in the laws of Taharis? On the one hand, the whole point of the Parah Adumah, of the burning of the Parah Adumah, is to allow the purification of a tamei meis, of somebody that touched a corpse, and he wants to become pure. And in order to go into the Beis Hamikdash or eat kachim, he needs to have a sprinkling of the ashes of the Parah Adumah. So therefore, it's appropriate that the Rambam places the laws of Parah Adumah not in the laws of Karbanis, but in Sefer Torah, in the laws of purification, because the primary purpose of Parah Adumah is for Torah. On the other hand, many laws of Parah Adumah, many of the halachas of Parah Adumah are connected to the laws of Kachim. For example, and it's a carbon that was allowed to be brought outside the Mikdash, but on the other hand, there are many laws that are connected to the Beis Hamikdash. For example, one of them is it had to be done in a place that you were able to see the Heichal. So it was somehow connected to the Beis Hamikdash, somehow connected to Kachim. In truth, there's two other halachas, or two other types of animals that the Torah talks about, which we won't spend time on today due to time constraints, that are very similar to the laws of Parah Adumah, and that is the Egla Arufa and the Soyer HaMishtaleach. These are also two types of animals similar to the Parah Adumah in the fact that there's many conditions that apply to it, and they weren't brought, so to speak, in the Beis Hamikdash, and they have similar conditions to a carbon. So the interesting part is there's right away in the beginning of Parah Adumah, there's an interesting machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam begins the halachas of Parah Adumah by saying mitzvahs Parah Adumah shutia bashol lishonim bas arba. The Parah Adumah had to be 3 or 4 years old, and if it's older, it's kosher. But we don't wait because we're worried that maybe the red hairs will turn black. And another halacha is we don't take an egla, we don't take a little cow, a baby cow, a calf. We don't take a calf and raise it because on the one it says v'yiklecha para. It has to be a para, not an egla. So the Ravid argues on the Rambam, and the Ravid says that the Ravid argues on what he writes over here about 3, how old it has to be. He says, the reason that we don't take a younger calf, not because it says the word para, because ein magdishin mechusas zman lemizbeach. It's we can't sanctify a animal that is not yet of age to the mizbeach. Ukeshem she'ein magdishin balas mum, says the Ravid. Just like we can't sanctify, we can't make a carbon of a balmum, of a defected animal. And so therefore, what do we see from here? We see that there's a fundamental machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid. What is the geder of a Parah Adumah? The Rambam seems to indicate that it has a special geder, and the Ravid seems to indicate that it was simply another type of a carbon. Another interesting aspect of the Parah Adumah is the famous halacha. It's mentioned in numerous sichos and mentioned in numerous places that they were metama, they defiled the kohen that was had to do was misasik with the para. They made sure that he was a tzvul yom in order to disprove the opinion of the tzdukim, etc. And that's how the Rambam learns this in also in our Perek, whether in Halacha Yudalit and Tezvav, that tzdukim hayu oimrim shein ma'aseh parah kosher ale b'mura b'shemesh, and therefore hayu bezdin b'sheni mitamim esakayin asay v'savara b'sheretz. These cannot be connected to kachim. We know that kohen that was tamei, that touched a carbon, the very serious thing. It's karis even. And so on the other hand, we see that in that aspect, Parah Adumah was not a carbon. And on the other hand, we find the Rambam the Rambam writes that kol hamumim ha'paislin b'kachim paislin b'parah. It's in order to verify, or in order to establish the validity of a Parah Adumah, it was not allowed to have any mum. How do you decide what mum was acceptable? Those mumim that were not acceptable as a carbon are acceptable as a Parah. So there's like a hybrid, an interesting hybrid going on over here. Exactly what the gather of a Parah Adumah is. So the Rambam brings down in one of the halachas, the Rambam brings down that the gather of a Parah Adumah, in other words, the sanctification, so to speak, the application of a Parah Adumah as a requisite to be part of the Beis Hamikdash, he says it was katshe bedek habayis. It was similar to somebody who donated any asset that he owned. He donated it to the Mizbeach. And the Gemara deals with this in a very lengthy way, and we'll see in a minute how this will relate to what we're going to the gather of the difference, of course, between katshe bedek habayis and katshe mizbeach is katshe bedek habayis is katshe bedek habayis was an asset that was able to be sold and done anything with. Katshe mizbeach was given on the condition that it becomes a carbon. Of course, we have the famous pasuk. I'm bringing a lot of different information to show that the Parah Adumah was a very, very unique type of product in the Beis Hamikdash. It says in the Torah, "V'haisel adas bnei Yisrael lemishmeres lemeinida chatos he," which is what the Alter Rebbe was referring to. Chatos kari rachmana. Again, it's not. It doesn't say mafar seifes apara. It says seifes achatos. And the Rambam in Perek Aleph Halacha Zayin, which we just mentioned, that the Rambam writes that even though it's kikotche bedek habayis, but it's more than that. And there's a machlokes of Rishonim on this. The Tosfos argues. Tosfos says it's not kotche bedek habayis, and the Kesef Mishnah asks a very strong question on this in this Rambam in this Perek. He asks a question on the Rambam that. The Rambam writes, Parah Adumah moyalim ba mishahugdisha. It gets into the gather of Meila until it becomes Afer. But till it becomes Afer, until it becomes ashes, it gets into the gather of Meila. Afal pi shikikache bedek habayis, even though it's only bedek habayis, because it says chatos. So again, we see here the Rambam is clearly telling us there's a hybrid going on over here, a very unique situation, that even though it's bedek habayis, but they still get the Mila. The Kesef Mishnah asks some question, what do you mean? We find in many instances that bedek habayis does have Meila, it's not unique to chatos. So the Kesef Mishnah wants to say that it is, but it isn't. It's Parahi, leikachim mizbeach, leikachim bedek habayis. It's a unique situation. Interestingly enough, on these halachas, Reb Chaim of Brisk in Chidusha Hagrach al Rambam, he argues on the Kesef Mishnah, and he goes through a lengthy exposition of exactly what is the gather of the Parah Adumah, and he writes. It has two dinim. Surprise, surprise. That the Parah Adumah has shnei dinim. That it has on it its side of kedushas bedek habayis, and it has its side of kedushas carbon. And those of you that want to look at his lengthy words, I'm sure you'll find very fascinating. But the Reb Chaim in Al Rambam goes through these issues that we just mentioned for the past 8 or 9 minutes. And he comes to the point that it has both situations, and I saw when I was researching this shir, I saw that in the Sridei Eish, in the Tshuva Sridei Eish from Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Ayin Ches, he brings down that a Talmud of Reb Chaim wrote him that Reb Chaim said Balpeh, a more of a expanded version of how he explains it in his Chidushim on the Rambam, and he goes to say that there's a difference between how you're magdish the Parah Adumah and how you're makriv the Parah Adumah. It's 2 steps. The hegdish of the Parah Adumah is a hegdish of bedek habayis, and the hakrava is a hakrava of chatos. In other words, there's 2 components. The chalais of hegdish is a chalais of bedek habayis, and the chalais of the hakrava is a chalais of a carbon chatos, and it becomes a chatos only by the hakrava. Till the hakrava, it has the gather of a bedek habayis. After the hakrava, it has the gather of a chatos. When? By the shchita. By shchitas hapara, it has a din of hakrava. And with this, he wants to answer many questions. So therefore, he concludes that the kedusha of the carbon is only by the akrava, and until the akrava, it's kedusha bedek habayis, and all the dinim for those that are familiar with kachim between the kachim bedek habayis and kachim carbon, kachim mizbeach, are therefore applicable. It's very interesting, very beautiful how the Reb Chaim kind of puts it all in one beautiful package, and he divides it into, not stam, he throws out a word that there's 2 dinim, but he explains how there's 2 steps. There's 2 steps to it. We don't really have time to go through more subjects. I just want to mention, again, we mentioned before that there's other types of animals similar to the Parah Adumah. We have, for example, the Egla Arufa, where it's very interesting. If you look in the Torah, you'll see that by Parah Adumah it says, famously, V'ikho elecha Parah Adumah timima asher ein ba mum asher lo Allah haleh oil. And if you look at the Egla Rufa, it has again a similar thing, even though it's the opposite. In other words, so we see that there's a lot of comparisons. I just also want to mention another interesting prat, just to show how rich the topic is. There's a major machlekes harishainim, of which the Rambam has, of course, an opinion, and it's based on a machlekes tanoim of who exactly brought the Parah Adumah. So we're all familiar. We listen to Parshas Parah every year. Also, we say Chitas, and it's a pasuk mefurish. The Torah begins in Parshas Chukas, Unesatem Oisa El Elazar HaKohen. So Rashi famously says, Mitzvah Bisgan. The mitzvah Parah Adumah is a mitzvah. Aaron HaKohen was still alive. Nevertheless, the Torah says, Unesatem Oisa El Elazar HaKohen. And Elazar was the one who dealt with this. So, Boa Kosev Elimid, Allah Parah Shinasis Bisgan, says the Gemara, actually the Medrash. So there's a major machlekes harishainim. I can't go through it in detail now, but whether the mitzvah bisgan that we just mentioned was only by the first Parah Adumah or by all the subsequent Parah Adumas. So there's a three-way machlekes based on the Gemara and Yumam and Beis. And the Rashi, of course, says mitzvahs of bisgan. Rashi doesn't make a differentiation between the first parah and the later parahs. The Ramban al-Asar, the Ramban explains Rashi to mean that only the first Parah Adumah was bisgan, but subsequent Parah Adumas were dafke b'kohen gadol. In other words, it was this gan was usher, was prohibited from bringing the Parah Adumah, but later on it had to be done by a kohen gadol. And one of the reasons that the Ramban gives that why in that first parah the Sgan did it because it was outside of the Mishkan. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't want to give Aaron an Aveda that wasn't in the Mishkan. It was a unique covet that was given to Aaron that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want to give Aaron something outside the Mishkan. But later on, it was different. So the Ramban learns that in subsequent generations, it had to be done dafke through a kohen gadol, and he brings a raya from a brayso and Masechta Parah, and the three were machlekes. He could amri this, he could amri l'deiros b'kohen gadol. Finally, of course, this is a shir on Rambam. The Rambam in our Perek Aleph Halacha Yud Aleph writes l'deiros muter shapara aduma tishafet kohen hediyot. He says af kohen hediyot. Kosher service of para afkain hedit. Could be Shinamar Nisata Isa El Elazar Akayin by Dain Aaron Hayakayim, says the Rambam. Mipia Shmuel Lamdu Zu Nasis Belazar. The Mipia Shmuel says the Rambam Teresh Balpeh Zu Nasis Belazar. The first para was done by Elazar. Bishar Kol Aparis Bein B'Kohen Gadol Bein B'Kohen Hediyot. Whether it's through a Kohen Gadol or through a Kohen Hediyot. So he wants to the Mefarshim learn out that the Rambam is telling us that the psukim that talk about the Nasata Isa Elazar Kohen is not coming to tell you that it's bedafka, it has to be done through a Kohen Hediyot, but in that case, it's to say that even over there, Elazar was able to do it, even though he wasn't a kohen gadol, but similar to the way the Ramban wants to learn. However, there's a very interesting point, and again, unfortunately, we're time constrained. There was a very big lamdim in Vilna before World War II. He wrote a phenomenally lamdish sefer. I'm sure you heard of it, called the Marcheshes, and the Marcheshes deals with this Rambam at length, and he comes to the conclusion based on the machlekes in the Gemara, the machlekes in Chulin, Daf Chav Tesa mit Beis, whether yeshne lishrita mitchila at seif or ein shrita ela b'seif, he comes to a conclusion that not only according to the Rambam even, not only is a kohen that could it be through a kohen gadol or a kohen hedyet, but from the Lashon HaGemara over there, it talks about a sudra that he put on a sudra, which is like a cloak. So the Machash says, who's putting on, the Gemara talks about putting on a cloak because it became tummy, so he had to put another cloak on. This is all during the Shrita of the Kohen Gadol. Look at the Gemara there. So the Machash says, what's sudra here? If it's a Kohen, it's really begodim. So the Machash comes to the conclusion that a Parah Adumah is not only kosher according to the Rambam, the Kohen Hedyet or a Kohen Gadol, but even a Zar, even a non-Kohen is allowed to shech the Parah Adumah, and this is consistent with what we've mentioned many times in our halachas in the last few shiurim, that according to the Rambam, shchita was not an avodah, and therefore shchita is ksheira d'zar, and the same thing with the Kohen Hedyet, with the Parah Adumah, and it's a gewaltige chiddush. Have a nice day.